There's a lot of hope that scenario B is in play because we have serological tests now. Pretty exciting findings, or are they? Hello everyone, this is Dr. Chris Martenson here with you for your SARS-CoV-2 daily update. I had a nice weekend off, got a lot of gardening done. That is good. And it is April 20th, so happy 420 everybody. Day 88. Let's call this crazy days. Hey Cheech, hey Chung, how you guys doing there? All right. Looking at the numbers here, these are from April 19th, these cases. That would be yesterday because today is 420. And what I want to talk about here is that these numbers are going down quite a bit. The United States is down, still horrifying numbers, but down quite a bit. Still horrifying, but down quite a bit from what it was at its peak. So it looks like containment is working like it has worked in all sorts of places like Spain and Italy. All these numbers have very much flattened out. And Germany still coming up pretty strong here. It looks like the serious and critical in Germany is starting to climb a little bit more here, and their total deaths is starting to sneak up as well. So I'm not sure if I'm too surprised by that. We'll see how this all plays out at the end. But I do think Germany tells us that there are many more people who have been infected than have been detected as infected in Germany compared to other places in the world which have tested less frequently, all that. Still very hard to get tested in the United States. That's going to bear on some of the serological testing we're about to talk about here, which of course is the test that asks and answers the question, have you been infected? And hopefully implies that once you have and you have circulating antibodies, you are now immunologically safe from getting reinfected. That's the hope. Of course, we don't know if that's actually true. China, they bumped their numbers up a while ago on total deaths, but they still have a very, very long way to go. I think at least an order of magnitude, make that 46,000 just out of Wuhan alone. I think we'd be pretty close to correct for what happened in China. At any rate, we still see all sorts of spreads of this disease and everything like that. And this is with a lot of very active social distancing and other containment measures and lockdowns and things like that. Of course, this does not sit well with a lot of populations. And so there's a lot of articles out there praising Sweden's approach. Sweden challenges Trump and scientific mainstream by refusing to lock down. Lots and lots of pictures of people in Sweden, no face masks to be seen, buying ice cream, walking around, not a lot of social distancing, no gloves, all kinds of stuff like that, right? In fact, in the protests erupting across the U.S., we have people here with the American flag in the background there saying, be like Sweden, also calling it a fake crisis. And not a face mask to be seen in this crowd, no 6-foot distance, anything like that. I wonder if be like Sweden, if this gentleman means that the United States ought to have free health care and expanded maternity and paternity leave and free childcare, stuff like that. But I don't know. But if he means be like Sweden, maybe he ought to bust out a chart. Here's one. This shows the performance of Sweden compared to some of its nearest neighbors here, say Norway, Finland, Denmark. And I think you can see there's kind of a difference. It's a little bit of a difference between these, how these countries are actually performing here with respect to all of this. And so this isn't normalized to first 100 cases, but it's not that far off. So first 100 cases for everybody is, this is the 100 mark right here. It's possible that Norway and Finland will catch up here with Sweden, but it looks like they're on very different trajectories. And so that's Sweden's experience with the whole thing. And remember, in order to really get your hands around this pandemic, you got to halt inbound infections. But then this is it. Face masks for everyone. And I could show you again that the Czech Republic has brought down its R0 well below 1 now. It does that because everybody wears face masks. It's really a very obvious, simple thing. Why? Because people who are infected, even if they are pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic, here's the number one reason we all wear face masks, because you don't know who's sick. You don't even know if you're sick. I don't know if I'm sick. And because of that, we all wear masks when we're in public. And then the sick people have less of an opportunity to spray those booger goblets out that are full of the virus particles. Okay, that's it. It's not hard. It's very simple. It's like if you spread less of the disease around, fewer people catch it. That's the whole magic behind wearing a mask. But boy, you would think that wearing a mask was, the next best thing to full-blown tyranny. Here is a protest in Texas. I do see one mask right there, but let's play this and just take a peek here. as we look at what's happening here. Why is that? That is not going to play for me right now. All right. That happened to me before. I think I have to restart PowerPoint to get that to work. So at any rate, this would just scan around, and as it scans back, you'll notice that there's one person over here with a bandana face mask on. Here's another woman here with a bandana face mask. That's it. And they are all yelling, fire Fauci, fire Fauci. So they're pretty inflamed. They think they're going to blame this. They need to face a blame. Fauci's it. So at any rate, we're seeing more and more and more of this. The prediction is that we're going to see a lot of people get the COVID and come down with it and discover that it's not the flu and it's a very bad thing to get. All right. One of the big things that came out this weekend, and of course it got discussed on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of this. It's the Stanford Study. It says here's a headline out of Nature. Nature's a really good, one of the best science journal out there. This was a write-up for Nature, so maybe it's not quite the same as an actual science study. But, what do we got here? Antibody tests suggest that coronavirus infections vastly exceed official counts. And, of course, that would be good news, right? Because, well, let's go to some of this. I think this virus and this test is kind of – the Stanford test has become a Rorschach test. People seeing it what they want to see. So saw this everywhere. Stanford study shows COVID-19 number of infections underestimated by 50 to 85 times. Go ahead and read the Stanford antibody study a few days ago. COVID isn't and won't dwarf normal flu deaths, 61K. I don't know where they got 61K. I've never seen 61,000 deaths. Or hospitalizations, 1.3 million. Nope, that's not per the CDC, not any numbers I'm familiar with, but nice try, Nick. The new Stanford study is showing 50,000 minimum cases, which means that with the current death count, we get a mortality rate of 0.1%. Very different from the 3 to 4%. Okay. Fraser Nelson here says Stanford Medical School has published results of its first mass antibody test, finds COVID prevalence 50 to 85 times higher than confirmed cases. 50 to 85, 50 to 85. You see what's going on here? You're getting a conclusion has been very strongly drawn here. A new Stanford study shows virus is much more common and less deadly than we were told. On the other side, we would add a couple of things. Robert Nelson here saying the Stanford antibody study is 1, not a random sample. That's a good point, actually. 2, not surprising with a lack of testing in California. Interesting conclusion there. 3, may indicate what we've always known. More people have it, which is true. We've always known that more people have it. The question has always been how many more. And 4, indicates it is likely not as widespread as some predicted and far, far from herd immunity, which is actually true, because even if you were at 50 to 85 times more than we thought, that still only brings you max to 4% of the population. Herd immunity is where? 80%. So Robert's got a few good points in there. And Srinivasan, a very good statistician here, says a new 2,300-word peer review of the Stanford paper. I'm glad they did a serosurvey, but I'm skeptical of the conclusion because tests may have a high false positive rate. Sample may be enriched for COVID-19. Study implies faster spread than past pandemics. So I went and hunted that paper down. We'll look at that in just a minute. But first, here's the Stanford study in Nature as they wrote it. These are the front 2 paragraphs. Again, in Nature, one of the best science journals out there. Here's how they characterized it right up front. And I'll be fair, on the back end, all the way at the bottom of this article, they did say, well, there's some other experts are maybe questioning the study. All right. But here's how Nature led off. Widespread antibody testing in a Californian county has revealed a much higher prevalence of coronavirus infection than official figures suggested. This is leading, and this is why I would take exception to how this was written and edited. Nature, hope you're listening, has, in between these two words, hasn't revealed, should be a qualifier like has potentially or allegedly or possibly or something. But this is a declarative statement, has revealed, and it hasn't done any such thing, as we'll see in just a second. The findings also indicate that the virus is less deadly than current estimates of global case and death count suggest. Also indicate, the findings also suggest, possibly indicate, something like that. But some scientists have raised concerns about the accuracy of kits used in such studies because most have not been rigorously assessed to confirm they are reliable. Yeah, that's an important qualifier, but still this declarative sentencing up here, it's not good. I really ought to soften that up. An analysis of the blood of some 3,300 people living in Santa Clara County in early April found that 1 in every 66 had been infected with SARS. So I'm not sure why they put it that way, because you have to do math in your head. Why don't you tell me they tested 3,300 people and how many of them tested positive? And the answer is 60. That's what happens when you divide those things. All right, that's an easier number for me to get my hands around. 60 people tested positive out of 3,300. On the basis of that finding, the researchers estimate that between 48,000 and 82,000 of the county's roughly 2 million inhabitants were infected with the virus at that time. Had been infected with a virus at some point prior to that time, because it takes time to develop antibodies. Numbers that contrast sharply with the official case count of some 1,000 people reported in early April, according to the analysis posted today on medRxiv. The work has not yet been peer-reviewed. That's always important, getting that peer review, so you always want to have that shaker of salt with you when you're seeing the not yet peer-reviewed stuff. Of course, we do that here. Now, let's dive into this a little bit. So this is the study. And these are all the researchers here. And there's a few names I'm going to call out because we're going to come back to them again. We're going to note Andrew Bogan here. We're going to notice John Ioannidis. We're going to notice Jay Bhattacharya here. And Aaron. We're going to take a peek at all these names again in just a minute. All right, here's what they said. They said, we report the prevalence of antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 in a sample of 3,300 people. Adjusting for zip code, sex, race, ethnicity. We also adjust for test performance characteristics using 3 different estimates. 1, the test manufacturer's data. So how much do we trust the test manufacturer to provide good data? 2, a sample of 37 positive and 30 negative controls that they tested themselves at Stanford. And 3, a combination of both. So they take the test manufacturer's data. They tested 37 and 30 samples, one known to be positive, one known to be negative, for you get your controls. And then they combined all that data. I got to tell you, 37 and 30, those numbers aren't big enough. They're really too small. In particular, the negative controls, you can get lots of those out there. Just go to the blood bank, anything before December, and you have as many as you want. But at any rate, that's what they did. Results, the unadjusted prevalence of antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 in Santa Clara County was 1.5%. Okay? And the population-weighted prevalence was 2.81%, and got a lot of concerns about how they did their population weighting here, so there's some concerns about that. And under the 3 scenarios for test performance characteristics, the population prevalence of COVID-19 in Santa Clara ranged from 2.49% to 4.16%. These prevalence estimates represent a range between 48,000 and 81,000 people infected in Santa Clara County by early April. 50 to 85-fold more than the number of confirmed cases. Oh, I'm sorry, it was 50 positives out of 3,300, not 60. Did I say 60 before? It was 50. So out of 3,300 people, they said, wow, we got 50 positives. All right. But there's some issues here, okay? Some pretty big issues, and we'll get to those and dig through those. And so this is why this complexity is really important, and it's really important for these studies to be done right, and really important decisions are about to be made on whether to open the country or how much to push for people to wear face masks or all of that. And this, a lot of people clung to this 50 to 85-fold more as if this was conferred some sort of magic immunity. Like, look, it's already swept across and it hasn't been that bad, right? But even if we took this at face value and said that 4.16% of the population had been infected, that means we're very early in this and we're nowhere near herd immunity. Full stop. But there's a lot of things to suggest that this study could be complete bunk. I mean, completely wrong. So let's get into it real quick. So this is from the conclusions of their own study. So this was based on this paper here. Here's the link for it. I pulled this off at the very bottom of it down there. So I'd like to, so they say here, we consider our estimate to represent the best available current evidence, but recognize that new information, especially about the test kit performance, could result in updated estimates. For example, if new estimates indicate test specificity to be less than 97.9%, our SARS-CoV-2 prevalence estimate would change from 2.8% to less than 1%. That would be, okay, that's a pretty big change right there. So a lot obviously hinges on the test specificity. So remember, there's 2 things. There's specificity and sorry. Whoops. I just skip past that there. Specificity and sensitivity. All right. And so one is measuring for the number of false positives you might get. The other's measuring for the number of false negatives you might get. We'll cover that in just a second. But let's just say that, look, this test has to be really, really accurate. If it's less accurate than 97.9%, their estimates plunge from 2.8 to less than 1%. And the lower uncertainty bound of our estimate would include 0. In other words, their test kit wouldn't have detected. I mean, it's not hopeful. Doesn't give us any useful information. However, on the other hand, lower sensitivity, which has been raised as a concern with point-of-care kits, would imply that the population prevalence would be even higher. So sensitivity and specificity. So let's go through this real quick because this is really important. Now, remember, this is a testing reality. So let's say we had an antibody test with a sensitivity of 93.8%, which is the actual sensitivity of another test that's out there being used right now. Because of the magic of Bayesian math, that works out to a false positive rate of just about 4.4%. It means that if you randomly selected 1 million people, which isn't a critical when you're doing population serology tests like this, you have to have a random sample. Okay, really critical. And if the true incidence was 1%, that means 990,000 people would be uninfected because 1% of a million is 10,000. And 1%, is 10,000. So actually 10,000 are infected. So if you have a sensitivity of 93.8%, it means a sensitivity says you accurately found a positive. You had a positive, you detected the positive. That's how the test is sensitive in a way that it detects all these positives. All right. So 9,380 people were detected. You missed 620 of them. But you also had 43,560, which rounds up to 4.4%, false positives, right? Because the specificity, you got some false positives out. They were actually negative, but they showed up as positive anyway, which means that if these circumstances were existing, you had a 1% true rate of incidence, you had a 93.8% sensitive test, it would mean that 82% of all the positive tests would be false, right? So that's the issue here. Okay, so let's get in on here. So I actually dug down further, and then I finally found here on Extreme Tech. Thank you for writing this up, extremetech.com. This was great because it always comes down to, all right, what's the study? What did they actually use? And it turns out that there weren't that many tests out there. So check this out. It's always important what the test is. At the time Stanford did the study, there weren't any FDA-approved COVID-19 antibody tests for clinical use. But for research purposes, the team purchased tests from Premier Biotech in Minnesota. Premier has started marketing a COVID-19 antibody test, but it doesn't create it. The test listed on the company's website and that it appears Stanford used is from Hangzhou Biotech, an established Chinese lab test vendor. Oh, Chinese vendor. Uh-oh. It is similar in concept to a number of COVID-19 antibody tests that have been available in China since late February, and the clinical test data matches the data Stanford provides exactly, so it appears to be the one used. So here's the test. So what's the issue? The issue is this. There is some additional reason to be skeptical about the particular test used. In another preprint, researchers from the hospitals and university in Denmark rated the Hangzhou-developed test last in accuracy of the 9 they tested. In particular, it only had an 87% specificity, meaning it misidentified 2 of 15 negative samples as being positive. And that is a far cry from the 99.5% calculated by Stanford. Here's the actual data from the preprint. So the manufacturer, remember, so here's the thing. They said they took the manufacturer's data and used that. And but when we see that this preprint, I went and looked at this one too. These hospitals and universities in Denmark, they took a whole bunch of these tests and ran them against each other. They ran 9 of them, and this one scored the worst. So using the manufacturer's test data, there's a little bit of a strike right there. Okay, so the first thing is the sensitivity and the specificity of the test may be way, way off. And in fact, all that it has to be here is that for the Stanford study becomes completely invalid if they're only off by 0.5% in the specificity of the test. It just the results include 0 as soon as they include that. Plus, here's a second problem. Here's how they got people. They put out an ad on Facebook and said, hey, we're going to be tested for COVID-19 antibodies. Come on down. And 3,300 people showed up. So remember, one of the most important things is you have to have a random test. So check this out. So this was a great, here's the link down here. This was a really great statistical takedown of this whole article. Number one went through all of the ways that their test sensitivity might have been really blown, and really took them to task for that. But here was the second problem, 2A. First, exposed people may have signed up for the study to get tested. The first mechanism that could significantly enrich the number of COVID-19 cases in a study is if symptomatic or exposed people use the study to get a test they could get no other way. After all, in the Bay Area in early April, it was really hard to get a test for people with mild symptoms or exposure. So, people who thought they were exposed or symptomatic may have signed up for the study to get access to a free COVID-19 test they could get no other way. We only need approximately 50 out of 3,300 to exhibit this behavior, and then the whole study's just blown. And there are at least some who appear to have done just that. So because it wasn't random, because they said, hey, we're going to be testing for COVID, come on down, they easily could have had a bias in their study by having people find that out. And in fact, it turns out that was the case. It turns out that exposed people may have recruited other exposed people for the study. Here's how that works. The second mechanism that could significantly enrich the number of COVID-19 cases in the study is if symptomatic or exposed people recruited other symptomatic or exposed people to get tested. Recall that recruitment of study participants was done through Facebook. People who thought they had symptoms or exposure could be sharing links to the study in private groups, WhatsApp chats, email threads, and the like. If one of those groups was for people who had COVID-19 symptoms or exposure, then it's game over. You could get a super recruiter event where even one person recruits N other enriched people to the study, and then that could significantly boost the number of positives beyond what you'd see in a random sample of Santa Clara. That's easy. That could easily have happened. All right. And if you want to see a full takedown of this thing statistically, go to that link right there. We'll post the link before as well. Andrew Gelman just did a brilliant job taking it down at this link right here. This is the very politely titled Concerns with Stanford Study. It goes through all of the significant biases and how the statistics really needed to have been run by somebody with proper statistical experience, because it wasn't. Their conclusions were off. Their confidence intervals were too tight, and they made bogus conclusions. And the whole thing's gonna have to get redone. At any rate, I loved his summary. He said, "I think the authors of the above linked paper owe us all an apology. We wasted time and effort discussing this paper, whose main selling point was some numbers that were essentially the product of a statistical error. I'm serious about the apology. Everyone makes mistakes. I don't think the authors need to apologize just because they screwed up. I think they need to apologize because these were avoidable screw-ups. They're the kind of screw-ups that happen if you want to leap out with an exciting finding and if you don't look too carefully at what might have gone wrong." Indeed. In fact, on the same day that this study came out in that preprint, right here in the Wall Street Journal on April 17th, by Andrew Bogan, was this thing: new data suggests coronavirus isn't as deadly as we thought. Just a study finds 50 to 85 times as many infections as known cases, meaning a far lower fatality rate. Okay, some experts, including in these pages, have questioned this assumption. They argue that known cases are likely only a small portion of the true number of infections, and thus high case fatality rates could be off by orders of magnitude. We don't know what portion of infections have gone undetected for a lack of tests, restrictive qualifications to get tested, and a potentially large incidence of mild illness or asymptomatic infection. New data supports the skeptics' view. A preliminary study by a Stanford team released Friday. They concluded a seroprevalence study of Santa Clara County, California on April 3rd and 4th. They studied a representative sample of 3,300 residents. Well, representative if you don't include the fact that people were openly notified that it was a COVID study on Facebook, and they were open to recruit their friends who they also thought might have been in their chat rooms exposed or anything like that. But that's representative to these people. To test for the presence of antibodies in their blood that would show if they had previously been infected with the novel coronavirus. So I want you to look at some language right here. Some experts, okay? There was a study. A Stanford team did this stuff. A study finds, all very impersonal, right? The researchers, again impersonal, found that the percentage of infections was indeed vastly larger than the roughly 1,000 known positive cases in the county at the time of the study. And by the way, I know there's more cases than what has actually been reported through the PCR test. We all know that. The question is how many more? We need to know that. The preliminary results, the research will now undergo peer review, thank God, show that between 2.5% and 4.2% of county residents are estimated to have antibodies against the virus. That translates to those numbers again, 50 to 85 times as high. That may sound scary, but it's great news. It suggests that the large majority of people who contract COVID-19 recover without ever knowing they were infected, and that the U.S. infection fatality rate may be more than an order of magnitude lower than authorities had assumed. Based on the seroprevalence data, the authors estimate that in Santa Clara County, the true infection fatality rate is somewhere in the range of 0.12 to 0.2%, far closer to seasonal influenza than the original case-based estimates. And this is all that's given for down in the bottom of the paper in the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Bogan, a molecular biologist, is a managing member of Bogan Associates, LLC. That's it. That's all that's said about this individual. But I remember I wanted you, oh, look, he's an author on this paper. Isn't that interesting? He's an author on the paper, and here in the Wall Street Journal, there's absolutely no declaration of that. It's not stated that this is one of these experts as part of the Stanford team, a study author, that somehow this Mr. Bogan was part of this study. And I wonder how he's part of this thing, because he's not actually a Stanford researcher, and he's more of a venture capitalist. He does have a PhD in relevant science, but his work of the past number of years, when I went to his website, is all about venture capital and stuff like that. So maybe he provided the funding for this. I don't know. But at any rate, that's a clear conflict of interest that was not disclosed by the Wall Street Journal. So shame on that. But on them for that, by the way. Also, some experts, including in these pages, that rang my bell, so I went back and checked it out. Remember this? We talked about this way back on March 24th or 25th. I pulled this out. I think this is in the March 25th. This was an opinion piece, said, is the coronavirus as deadly as they say? It was by this Aaron Ben David and Jay Bhattacharya. Wait a minute. Aaron and Jay. Oh, look. Aaron and Jay. So they're also authors on this thing, which very helpfully, you see, this is how the media works and things like this. Let me just see. Some experts, including in these pages, some experts. Oh, you mean the people who are on the same paper as you? So these some experts write, this is how this whole thing works. It's kind of fun. So these experts write this thing, and then this person refers back to them and says, some other experts agree with me. And then these other experts will write another paper saying, oh, look, we have this other study that agrees with everything we said. And this is a little circle jerk of self-reinforcing stuff. But when you tease it all apart here, look at this. This was what they wrote at the time. Look at just how this was. Oh, my God, this really drove me nuts. The best, albeit very weak, evidence in the U.S. comes from the NBA. Between March 11th and 19th, a substantial number of NBA players and teams received testing. By March 19th, 10 out of 450 rostered players were positive. Since not everyone was tested, that represents a lower bound on the prevalence of 2.2%. And they admit here the NBA isn't a representative population, and contact among players might have facilitated transmission. But if we overlook that and extend that lower bound assumption to cities with NBA teams, we get at least 990,000 infections in the U.S. That is the weakest, stupidest thing you can do. That is a laughable comparison to make. Oh, no, the NBA isn't representative. What, you think? You think people bumping and breathing hard and slamming into each other and sweating all over each other is somehow representative in any way, shape, or form? Is a comparison? This is nuts. And again, shame on the Wall Street Journal for even having printed that, and they should have edited that right out and said, you got to come up with something better than that. But check this out. So if all of this is true, then these numbers imply a fatality rate from COVID-19 orders of magnitude smaller than it appears, orders. So they're already out here on an intellectual limb, having argued without any data, except for this stuff, you call that data, that the United States might have had many, many more infections. And then they happen to be not just on the paper, but this is very important, but the lead author and the principal author. These are the two most coveted spots on a science paper, the first and the last position, okay? The lead author is most responsible for everything that's happening in there, and the last name is usually the person whose lab that this work came out of. But at any rate, so these two are kind of on the hook intellectually for finding that prevalence is a lot higher than anybody suggested, because that was their supposition they put out there. But anyway, orders of magnitude smaller than it appears. So let's imagine that the real case fatality is 3%. One order of magnitude would be 0.3%. Two orders, to make it plural, orders of magnitude would be 0.03% actual case fatality rate. So these two right here, Aaron and Jay, they're intellectually out there with this claim. They would like this to be true. They really want that to be true. So you always have to watch for that kind of a bias and push hard against that and make sure you know what you're talking about. All right, but at any rate, lots of trouble with that study, and of course it doesn't matter because the Rorschach test has been run, and it's going to be very, very, very difficult to undo all of these people. There's thousands of people like, yeah, I knew it. Many more people have had this. We can end our lockdown now. And as well, you probably heard about this one. This one came out. A lot of people sent me this. 1/3 of mass residents test positive. I'm not going to tear the whole thing apart, but I'll just give you a taste of this. 1/3 of participants in Massachusetts study test positive for antibodies linked to COVID-19 after giving their blood samples in the street at random. Okay, this is already a better test than the other one because this was done at random. So the study was done by physicians at Mass General. They collected blood from 200 people in Bellingham Square. 1/3 of the study participants, 64 people, had COVID-19 antibodies. Results indicate that the participants previously had COVID. None of the 200 participants received their test results due to anonymity. So, as well, Chelsea had the highest rate of COVID-19 cases in the state. So it's a real hot spot. And in Chelsea, there's a lot of very condensed, crowded housing and a lot of people not of means who cram together. So very high prevalence there. But interestingly, the 200 participants generally appeared healthy, but about half told the doctors they had had at least one symptom of COVID in the past 4 weeks. So that doesn't have to mean much, right? If you had a headache, if you had a fever, if you had a cough, I mean, a lot of reasons you could have those sorts of things. But it might also not be a representative sample, so you always have to worry about that. 200 isn't a big test, but they didn't mention any of this in any. I had to dig really hard, but I finally found the test that these people used, and it's this test here from Biomedomics. And digging through there, I found this little gem which says, how accurate is this particular COVID-19 rapid test? And here's the bottom line. It has a sensitivity of just 88.66% and a specificity of just 90.63%. So lots of opportunities for false negatives and false positives, which means you have to put an error bar around this 1/3. That 1/3 could be as little as 4%. It could be higher. It could be lower. We don't know. Not a great test. We need sensitivities and specificities in the high 90s, particularly when you have a low incidence. Again, remember, with that low incidence, if you have a really low incidence, you get these big, giant, fat errors, unless you have super, super sensitive and highly specific tests. So the Massachusetts study needs to be rerun. I'm glad they did it, but again, you can't state things equivocally like 1/3 test positive. You have to qualify it, knowing what's going on in there. All right, that's what I got on those tests. I'm all for the serological test. Don't get me wrong. What I hate are bad conclusions and bad statistics and things like that without stating the assumptions up front and not disclosing the massive conflicts of interest that exist here. I don't know what's going on, but Stanford, you got a black eye. You're going to have to work hard to recover that. In other news, I can't believe this. This is happening right now. I took this shot just, right before I started this. Crude oil, this is not a misprint, has a current price of minus $35 a barrel. Now, this is the futures front price. That was a minus 294% loss. Anybody who was long oil got taken out to the cleaners today. Massive damage. There are guaranteed hedge funds who blew up on this. There are a variety of ETFs I'm very worried about. You will never see anything like this again in your life if you're lucky. This is a paper product and byproduct. We have broken markets right now. Obviously, oil isn't worth minus $35 a barrel, but all these people who had the paper contracts, each contract in the futures pit is worth 1,000 barrels of oil, and they were faced with a termination of that contract, and their choices were to either find somebody to buy that contract from them or to take delivery of 1,000 barrels of oil. And they couldn't do that on a contract-by-contract basis. So if you can't take a delivery and you have one of these contracts, do you want the 1,000 barrels, or will you take a big, giant, fat, stinking loss in order to sell that? Well, there's your answer. Lots of people dumping those contracts. This is interesting. This is a contango curve for oil. This is looking at all the different, if you wanted to buy oil out here in August of 2026, you could, and you'd be paying about $46 a barrel. And this was shot earlier today, so actually this number is now minus 35. It's way down there somewhere, way down there. And so what this tells us, the reason I'm putting this up, I don't want you to understand futures trading. What I care about, though, is this says that if you just went out 1 month, you'd find that oil is trading for about $22 a barrel, right? We come across $22 a barrel. So if you could buy 1,000 barrels right now, store it somewhere, you could make about $57 a barrel free just for storing it for a month. So what do these two pieces tell us together? Because that's all you'd have to do. Buy it today at minus $35 a barrel, store it for a month, and then sell it for $22. You could do that completely risk-free if you had a place to store it. Okay, this tells us there's nowhere left to store it, that the storage costs have shot through the roof. Because there's nowhere to store it, I can tell you that these prices are all going to get crushed down lower and lower as we go forward too. Because why? Because if we run out of storage, it means we're not using it. And if we're not using it, there's nowhere to put it. And if there's nowhere to put it, then the price has to collapse. And that's just the way that markets actually work. Because of all that, I'm really convinced, hey, you need to plant a garden. So happy to hear from so many of you who have been planting gardens, sending pictures, doing all that. Keep it up. All good stuff. Remember, you got to resubscribe to this channel. You got to resubscribe to Twitter, and just come by Peak Prosperity too if you want. And we've got a lot of people there weighing in on the fabulous conversations we have there. We are a very curious tribe. That's who we got at Peak Prosperity. A lot of curious, very intelligent people, and we like to use the data as best we can and think about how the future is going to unfold. So come on by Peak Prosperity if you want, either on the free side or the subscribe side. Love to have you there. Great conversations. All right, conclusions for today. All right, the Stanford study, it might be right, or there's one of those dreaded typos. It might be right, or you know what? It might be completely wrong. The error bars actually need to include 0. But that's a much less exciting thing, where they say, we conclude from our serological study that the number of people who have been infected with this is either 0 or 85 times more than we thought. The 0 just really takes the wind out of the sails. So they played fast and loose with their statistics, which means Stanford has come out with some really shoddy work of late. Really shoddy. Always, though, with the aim of downplaying the severity of the virus. So I no longer trust anybody on that Stanford preprint. Nobody. They're all on intellectual probation. And I'm going to, believe me, I have a long memory for that kind of stuff. But the serological testing, totally necessary. Well, it's totally necessary. We'll get there. Good science is on the way. They're going to come up with better test kits. We're going to have ones with higher sensitivity, higher specificity. We'll get there. But we're not helped by shoddy work. And that was really shoddy that came out of Stanford. Just awful. And the collapse in the price of oil, it's beyond historic. It's really difficult to overstate the lasting impact that's going to have. It's going to it's just capital destruction extraordinaire at this point in time. So that's going to have enormous economic impacts. All right, I am all done for today. Thank you very much for listening. we'll be back with you tomorrow.
Hi folks, Adam Taggart here. Chris Martenson and I are the co-founders of Peak Prosperity. If you want to get alerted whenever we release a new video from Chris, just click the red subscribe button right beneath the YouTube video player. Once you've done that, a little bell icon will appear right next to it. Click on that bell. It looks like this. And that's it. The next time we publish a video from Chris, you'll immediately receive a notification from YouTube. Thanks for watching our videos.